Good evening, everybody. How's it going? Um, we have to we have to start tonight by toasting a real one, Sidney Powell. I mean, this side of Scaramucci, few people have done more with less time than Sidney Powell, man. So here's my eulogy to Sidney Powell, Esquire. Um, she got wild, man. She got wild, and she got wild fast. Fast. Cheers to Sidney Powell. I mean, when Donald Trump is like, hey, this is getting a little crazy over here. Whew. What a job. What a job by Sidney Powell. Let's go over very quickly what Sidney Powell did in her brief moment for, in the service of Donald Trump's coup. Which, by the way, what a coup that it is. Still a coup, but my God. In her service of Donald Trump, Sidney Powell served in one of the craziest press conferences in American history, which, by the way, is saying something. Because, I mean, you have a bunch of right-wing grifters out there who are, I mean, God, that Wall kid is given like a press conference every week claiming that he found some sort of giant conspiracy. That press conference that Sidney Powell gave with Rudy Giuliani is one of the seminal moments in American history. Just to go ahead and rewind what she alleged, which is incredible, because in order to take Trumpism to the next level of madness, like, you have to be working hard. Like, you got to be hustling. And she hustled, man. You listen, she tried to carry out a coup in the United States of America, and she might have committed a couple of slanderous offenses, but you have to give her some credit where credit is due, and that is she got after it, man. She got up in front of the nation and claimed that Hugo Chavez, who has been dead for let me check my notes here, a while, was behind an international conspiracy to steal the election for Joe Biden. She got out. She pushed conspiracy theories that, by the way, were largely originated by Watkins, one of the guys who basically runs QAnon, and just like ran with it. We're going to talk a little bit in a minute about Newsmax and about the right wing and Sidney Powell and what this whole thing was about, because we have to examine this, and we have some questions about it anyway, but we have to talk about this thing. So she does that, and then, I mean, really, just an absolute force of nature. Again, let's cheers her again, Sidney Powell. What it's better to burn out than fade away. My God. Sidney Powell then gets herself a spot on Newsmax and is like, you know what? I'm on Newsmax. And by the way, as somebody who has been invited on Newsmax and has turned them down multiple times and will never appear on Newsmax unless, and by the way, if you hear that I'm going on Newsmax, like if I accept their invitation, that's must watch TV, because I'm going to go on there and I'm going to fuck things up on Newsmax if I ever get on Newsmax. If they ever invite me again, maybe I'll say yes. Maybe I'll say yes, and maybe I'll speak some truth to power. But she gets on Newsmax. I have to tell you, if you go on Newsmax, you go big or you go home. So she goes on Newsmax, and meanwhile, for the elite strike force, everyone, cheers to them. She goes on Newsmax. She's like, you know what, I'm going to bring it tonight. I'm going to bring it tonight. And Newsmax is just like, what do you got to talk about tonight, Sydney? What do you got for us on Newsmax? Real news for real people, which is my favorite news tagline. I've been watching way too much Newsmax lately. It's a new guilty pleasure. So she gets on there. She accuses Brian Kemp, the biggest Trump sycophant this side of Lindsey Graham. She accuses Brian Kemp of being bribed. She accuses a governor in the United States of America of being bribed to throw the election to Joe Biden. You know why? It is better to burn out than to fade away. Sidney Powell. A real one. A real one. Donald Trump sat down and was like, this is too much for me, man. And I tell you what, if you are too much for Donald Trump, if you somehow or another manage to out-Trump Trump, you are killing it. Killing it. You have done something well if you manage to freak Donald Trump out. If Donald Trump's like, I don't know, man, this sounds a little crazy. Sidney Powell, everyone. Cheers. You played the game. And you played the game to win. Cheers. I do have to say, joking aside, she got out over her skis is what happened. She totally did what Trump wanted. I mean, this entire election coup, grift, scam / authoritarian movement, they have totally meant to push this stuff. It's not like she was saying anything that Rudy was uncomfortable with, or even Trump was uncomfortable with. He probably believes this stuff. I mean, he's about 25 Diet Cokes in on the night, and he starts believing whatever, he sees on the Newsmax or the QAnon streams. She just got to it too quick. I think it was too much too fast. And I think going out and, calling Brian Kemp, telling Brian Kemp that he was bribed by foreign officials, I think she got out ahead of her skis. And I'll tell you the funniest thing about this. And actually, you know what? I have a question about this. So I'll wait to talk about Brian Kemp in a second, because Brian Kemp is a lot of fun. John's supposed to be back every day. JFK Jr. is supposed to be showing up. He was supposed to be Trump's running mate in 2020. Where's John? Bring him back. If you had John F. Kennedy Jr., if he faked his death and he's been waiting all this time to come back and mete out righteous retribution on the people who killed his dad and tried to kill him, what's he waiting for? You blew it. You blew it. Incredible. Just an incredible gaggle of bullshit from these people. What a bunch of frauds. Charlatan. Oh my God. What madness on the right wing. Which we got to talk about that tonight. But just madness on the right wing of in this country. Doesn't mean we're not in danger, because we are in incredible danger. But if you do not stop and appreciate Sidney Powell burning out and not fading away, I don't know what to tell you. Because that is, she's not going to make it in the history books. But those of us who were there, maybe the real coup are the friends we made along the way. Because I'm going to remember Sidney Powell going out and just getting wild on it for a long time. Giuliani streaking while Sidney Powell is shrieking and Rudy is very ill. Rudy is not well. What an incredible thing. Thank God Donald Trump and the people around him are incompetent. Thank God they're incompetent, because we're still in trouble even though they're incompetent. But if they were even a little bit competent, God, we'd be in trouble. We'd be in so much trouble if they were even like just a smidge competent. Whew. So let's jump into the question. We got a full slate tonight. And actually we got some different things to talk about tonight. We got some different conversations to have tonight. And I've got some stuff. For those of you who aren't familiar, I am. Oh yeah, Q is still posting. Q is basically at the point now where Q's just putting up like a GIF of an American flag fluttering in the breeze because Q, the Watkins, have no idea what to say at this point. Because Trump losing the election, I mean, what about this plan that they had going? It turns out this plan never shows up. So what are they going to do? But they got plans. They're going to figure it out. They're going to figure out the grift because cults always figure out the grift. We'll get to that. But we have a lot of stuff to talk about tonight and a lot of different kinds of stuff. So let's talk more about Powell. Elizabeth says, how do you think Mike Flynn groupies will respond to Trump's team's abandonment of Sidney Powell, considering she's Flynn's lawyer? So when you say Flynn's people, which, by the way, Michael Flynn, what a career that guy's having. I mean, from disgraced general to treasonous actor to disgraced national security advisor to now digital soldier in the thrall of QAnon. What a little run he's had. So what'll happen is, so I keep talking about the cult of Trump. And one of the things you have to understand about cults is that they winnow down, right? So they have this group of people, and there's like the initial phase where like they reach like their highest point and their highest point of membership. And then all of a sudden, like, it gets weird, and so they lose a few people. And then it gets weird, and they lose a few people. And then, I don't know, they claim an apocalypse is coming, and then it doesn't come, and they lose a few people. And then eventually what you end up with is a concentrated version of that cult. So there are some people who are like, I'm ride or die with General Flynn, because, I mean, who wouldn't be? What a hero that dude is. And so eventually what they'll end up doing is like a couple of people will slough off, and they'll be like, oh, the whole thing's corrupt, everything's bad. They'll basically become acting nihilist, and Flynn will be the road that they go through. Other people will be like, this is obviously part of the plan, which is what the cult is too. Is, oh no, I mean, Trump's playing a 3D game, so he had to give off Sidney Powell so she could go over here on this mission, or he had to give up Powell because he needed to distance himself and move here and move there. It's an incredible amount of cognitive dissonance that's at play. So yeah, some of them will leave and some of them will stay, and they'll double down. It'll be part of their bigger narrative. Somebody asked, does Sidney Powell stay in the arena? You know, a lot of people are like, does Sidney Powell, like, will she now say some stuff or whatever? No, Sidney Powell's going to show up on Newsmax every night. So this is the thing that I keep trying to explain to people, which is there is an economic incentive in all of this. Like, whether or not it's Trump or all the people in his circle, they're all just scrambling to get whatever penny or quarter that they can possibly get. So, like, you know, she'll stick around on Newsmax probably. Maybe there'll even be a bidding war between Newsmax and OANN. And that's one of the bigger problems, is that we now have this new emerging market for more extreme grifters. It's all about the grift, absolutely, which is one of the reasons why they're moving beyond Fox News. There's always a group of people who are going to push for this stuff, and they'll bring people along with them. Sidney Powell, I mean, there will be some people probably who think that Sidney Powell got distanced, or as I call it, fired, or I don't know, shit canned. That happened because she got too close to the truth, man. And all of a sudden she'll figure out a way to have her grift, and it'll be like, Sidney Powell has the truth. She'll probably release a book on something called like Heritage Publishing or something like that. There'll be some book that comes out, and she'll probably, her and Sebastian Gorka will do like an odd couple sort of a thing. There was just an explosion somewhere in the background there. That was weird. Southeast Georgia, man. They'll probably have like some sort of like thing where they start selling supplements of some type. Oh, no. She'll figure out a way to make a grift off of this. They all will. No, Parler is not having a meltdown yet. She was just sort of, she was a bit player for a moment. Like the Parler people, I mean, they're more interested in yelling out racial slurs than they are piecing together some sort of cohesive narrative. Yeah, it's, oh, are they? Daniel said the Newsmax is already the too close to uncovering the truth thing. Sure, she might even have a show. She might have a show on Newsmax by the end of the week. I mean, but the problem, and this goes back into what happened in Georgia. And actually, I'll go ahead and bring in the question. Michelle says, what in the hell is going on with your governor and Trump? So this goes back to what is actually happening in this. It makes a whole lot more sense if you start thinking about Trumpism as a religion. We keep saying cult, but let's just go ahead and call it what it is. It is its own religion. And at the top of it, the Pope of Trumpism is Donald Trump. So anybody around Trump, like, you have to be so sycophantic that you never ever waver, because it's an article of faith. Cults are religions. They're just religions that have not reached a certain status where they are accepted in the world. So religions always start out as cults, and then eventually they either make their way up and they get accepted, or they don't. So this right now, this is right between the cult and religion stage, but it's all about faith. Donald Trump says you don't need to listen to scientists. You don't want to believe your lying eyes. You don't want to believe what the news tells you. You don't want to believe experts. You don't want to believe what the media tells you or what the election results tell you. Believe what I tell you. And so what ends up happening is, because it's a religion or a cult or however we want to mess around with it, what ends up happening is that you have an orthodox. And the orthodox is the law that's laid down by the religion that says you have to worship within this sphere. And so the orthodox, at any moment, if you stray from one or the other, and by the way, I'm doing a lot of research right now for a new project. So I've been like just swimming in orthodox. So what happens is, if you stem outside of the orthodox, you become a heretic. And if you become a heretic, you're burnt alive, you're excommunicated, you're thrown out. Because if you challenge the orthodox, then you could possibly knock the whole, stack of cards over. So what's happening right now is that Trump is pissed off at people in Georgia. You saw this with the Secretary of State in Georgia. They were able to throw him under the bus because he was such a small sort of unknown figure. Actually, he possibly could be a governor down the line. That's done. That's over. His political career is probably over. Brian Kemp, though, is a governor. They went after a governor. They claimed that a governor had been bribed into throwing an election. And I have to tell you, there is no sycophant more sycophantic than Brian Kemp. He wants to be the next Trump, and he won't be. He's not talented enough. He's not smart enough. He's not capable enough. He could never reach out and grasp the Trump coalition. He can only do it in Georgia. That's exactly right, by the way. Kemp stole the election from Stacey Abrams. That's the only reason why he is a governor. But he's not talented enough to take over for Trump. But that's another story altogether. But right now, Kemp doubled down, and Kemp said, he sent out multiple emails today. They was like, I stand by Donald Trump and I'm here for election security. And by the way, I have to tell you that the, the 5th, 6th, 7th recount in Georgia, I don't know. By the way, cheers from the blue state of Georgia. Whatever this is, whatever recount this is, Kemp has thrown himself behind it. They also have to win the special election. They have to walk a very thin line of getting Republicans out to vote for the Republican candidates in the special election. So she got out over her skis. Meanwhile, Kemp showed himself to be a team player. He could have been like, screw you, man, pound sand. Like, you don't tell me that I've been bribed. That's what a person with integrity would have done. But instead, Brian Kemp got down and said, please, sir, may I have another? Kick me harder. I love you, Donald Trump. Kick me. I love the boot. I love the boot. Give me the boot. And he got the boot. Donald Trump took pity on him and gave him the boot, and they had to let go of Sidney Powell, except for Sidney Powell got done what she needed to get done. We now have a group of people who believe around Trump that there is a massive conspiracy to steal the election from him. That's all they needed. They just need to float a counter narrative. That's all that they ever need, because the cult is looking for the counter narrative. So that's what's going on with Trump and Kemp. And Kemp made the right choice. For him, I mean, if you had any human dignity, I would have said, screw you, man. But for him, he made the right political choice, and they ended up saying we have to move away. Greg says, I don't know how the courts work, but how many times is he allowed to challenge the results and appeal? I don't know. This Georgia thing is nuts. It's absolutely nuts. I mean, I don't know, man. And last I heard a rumor that the taxpayers are going to pay for this next recount, which you're welcome, I guess. Cool. QAnon is saying Powell will be running the FBI or Attorney General. That's the other thing about QAnon. And by the way, we're going to talk about this modern sort of the game within the game in a little bit, because somebody asked me about Chuck Todd, and I have some thoughts. So stick around for that. But QAnon does the same thing. It's like if somebody gets fired, or even Robert Mueller, if you look at the QAnon lore, Robert Mueller was like fighting the deep state. Like, yeah, he was Trump's opponent, but he was actually working with Trump to expose the deep state, which is just some incredible mind powers. Just galaxy brain thinking among the QAnon crowd. Oh, Chuck Todd sucks. I'll talk more about him in a second. Tip Your Briefs to Extra says, what's up with Trump inviting Michigan and Pennsylvania state legislatures to the White House? And says, if this coup won't pay off, then what's the point? So the point number one, and I keep saying this, and I hope this comes through again, it is both a grift and a coup at the exact same time. Trump is just trying shit. He's just trying shit. He's trying to establish himself where he'll leave the White House, possibly, and he'll be able to tell everyone that he's the anti-president. He never lost the election. He never got owned. I'm not owned, as he shrinks into a corn cob, says Drill. And he'll be able to play this anti-president role. He'll be welcomed into conservative conferences. He'll give speeches in places. He'll probably have a TV show, like either on Newsmax or OANN, where he speaks from a faux Oval Office. And he'll be able to say, I never actually lost the election. That's one thing. But if somehow or another, if he manages to break democracy, well, then that's fine. Donald Trump is flailing at all times. It's not multi-dimensional chess. He's just gnashing his teeth and trying shit. And if it just so happens that by trying shit, he destroys democracy, well, then that's where we are. He would gladly overthrow democracy, but right now he's trying to raise a bunch of money and give himself an alternate reality. The jail cells thing is another thing. I think he's completely terrified of both debt and legal ramifications that might wait for him. So he's trying whatever he can. It's what he's done his entire career. He's just trying shit. And because he is wealthy, rich, and a white man, it's always worked for him. It's always worked for him. He's never faced consequences. He's failed at one thing after another, and that's what's always happened. So he's trying shit. And so if it works, well, then it works, and he destroys democracy going forward. But he doesn't care. And the Republican Party is just, they're just holding on to like a wild stallion that they don't know where it's going, but they hope that it wears itself out. And if all of a sudden it breaks democracy, it breaks democracy. It works for them. Oh, there's a real possibility of Pence pardoning him. I think, and we've been talking about this on the Muckrake podcast, I think he goes back to Mar-a-Lago for either Thanksgiving or Christmas and just doesn't come back. Maybe he resigns and has Pence pardon him. Maybe he tries to pardon himself. But I think there's a real possibility we don't see him after the holidays. I think that's a real possibility. Diana says, in a live stream, you said Trump is a precursor to something else. Can you please expand on this? Your insights are profound. Well, thank you. I don't know if they're profound, but I appreciate that. That's pretty cool. So I think at this point, and I look at, because I've been doing these history books and sort of trying to understand how history works and how politics and all that works. I'm starting to see this future framing where Donald Trump is seen as a precursor to a future fascistic movement. I think this is one of those situations where we have been incredibly lucky that he is so exceptionally incompetent and transparent. The problem is what he has done is he has exposed multiple weaknesses in the system. And in doing so, he has laid the groundwork for other people to come in, take over where he's at, and do worse things. The frightening thing, and we'll talk more about this because I have a big question in a few minutes that it's different than any question I've been asked. So just hang in for that. But we're seeing a situation where we're going to have depleting resources here soon. I mean, I keep saying it, but if you think what happened at the border was terrible, just wait until all of a sudden we have millions of climate refugees. It'll just increase and increase and increase. This stuff isn't going to go away until we actually deal with the problems that led to Donald Trump. He's not the disease, he's a symptom. So I think he is a precursor possibly to something absolutely worse. And if we if we don't deal with these things, and if we don't look them in the eye, if we just pretend that this whole thing is totally fine and Joe Biden got elected and Donald Trump got rejected, whew, it's going to get really, really bad. Maria says, do you think if they are successful at overturning the results of the elections could end up in a civil war? Yeah, I do. If somehow or another he gets this in front of the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court hands him the election, why wouldn't people be in the streets? Why wouldn't they be? I mean, I would be. I wouldn't take that lying down. And then you have to assume that the right will try and enforce it via violence. That's what they do, violence and intimidation. So we'd have an asymmetrical civil war. I think that's what we're looking at. Whenever people say civil war, they think about armies lining up in like a meadow as like picnickers hang out over here, right? But that's not what it is. It would be an asymmetrical type of thing. And it would look a lot like what we have now, but escalated, unfortunately. Jamie says, my question is, how do we fight a power grab without becoming our enemy? Well, I think this is a big, giant question. I think that we need to stop viewing politics from a zero-sum standpoint, because the trajectory that we're on right now is where politics would actually be about determining who hurts. And I don't like that. I don't think it should be about, smashing others and crushing them underfoot. I actually think the more that we go that zero-sum way, the more possibility there is for fascism, the more possibility there is for asymmetrical warfare and violence. I think that that's where it gets really, really dangerous. So I would love to see a thing where we figure out how to make life better for everyone, and somehow or another it short circuits fascism along the way. I think that's really the only way moving forward. So I think that we have to maintain some sort of compassion and solidarity, while also realizing that there are people in this country who are fascistic. That is a really damn hard thing. Christy G, I think Jake, rat fuckery, ever ethically justified? Cheers to Jake for asking that, because I know Jake and I know why he's asking that. I think you have to win. I think you have to win by rightful means. I think that's a thing. I think that you have to win by rightful means. My family, parts of them are fascistic as well. Jessa says, I hope you are well. I'm not sure you've seen or heard any of the news coming out of France regarding the terrorist attacks, but it seems that Macron has somewhat gone Le Pen. I do not understand why these world leaders are shifting to the right, even in subtle ways, though this does not seem subtle at all to me. Anyway, the question for tonight's Bourbon Talk. How does it relate to what's going on in the U.S.? Here's a big answer. Here's a big, giant answer. So what's going on in France, and what's also going on in Europe in terms of dealing with quote-unquote terrorism or immigrants or Muslims or brown people or whatever you want to say, whatever this is about, is because the foundation of the modern quote-unquote liberal, democratic, globalist structure is white supremacy. It's based on this idea of tribalism, or the idea that it's us versus them. The big, giant issue at the heart of this is that we right now live in a world order that is based on artificial austerity. We're told there's no money for everything. We're told that, you know, we're under dire threats all the time. That's not the actual truth. That entire thing is a story and mythology that is told to keep us from complaining about this artificial state of austerity. The problem is that people who are in power, and this is left and this is right, and this is one of the biggest secrets of politics, and I hope you learn this, and I hope that you hear me say this and you understand this real fast, Sanzak, because that's an important question. What is the difference between a neoliberal and a Republican? And I'm going to answer that in just a second, but let me say this really, really quickly. What we understand is the left and the right. It's not necessarily the left and the right. It's the left and the right on a very specific part of the political scale. So what we see right now with so-called liberal leaders, they're still conservative, and they're still mostly on this neoliberal scale. The whole thing is we say neoliberal and we think it means left. Neoliberal does not mean left. In fact, the originators in terms of like leadership in the face of neoliberalism were Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher. The problem is that after Ronald Reagan, who had incredible rhetorical skills, and by the way, I don't know if you've seen it. Yeah, the no muffler guy is he makes cameos and all of this stuff in all of these videos because he does this all day. He just does laps and just backfires all day. There's actually a pretty good documentary series right now. I won't say it's on Showtime. It's about the Reagans. It's pretty good so far. After the first episode, it's pretty good. So Ronald Reagan had such a good mythological, rhetorical appeal that the Democratic Party said, we can't challenge this anymore. And what they did was that they had to embrace the economics of Reaganism, but put a human face on it. It was a happier, shinier type of neoliberalism. So when people say neoliberal, it sounds like leftist, but it's not. Neoliberalism is not left. Absolutely. Leo Strauss. If you don't want to go to sleep at night, read about Leo Strauss. But the whole point is that Macron is going after immigrants in the same way that all these other people are like, well, these are problematic things, because they can't imagine a future that doesn't look like the one that we have now. They can't talk about somehow or another getting rid of this artificial austerity. They can't figure out a way out of this globalist, hyper-capitalistic structure. So what we have is we have a bunch of leaders who can't figure out what to do next. And that's a big, giant problem. And we're going to talk more about that in a second because there's other questions that lead into it. So what's happening over in France? It's the exact same thing, because when you have artificial austerity, all of a sudden you have to start fighting over who gets the little scraps. And the thing that they keep finding is because so many of these countries are based on like Anglo-Saxon white interest or whatever, that at least they can use racism to sort of use as the underpinnings of society. Miranda in Cincinnati. Seriously, what the fuck is wrong with Chuck Todd? Chuck Todd is not a journalist. Chuck Todd is an observer. And Chuck Todd is an observer of the game of politics. So I saw this question, and this is something that I have not talked about in the past, but I want to give you a little bit of insight. And if you want to do a little bit of studying on your side, this should help try to explain this. So something happened, and I brought up professional wrestling in a thread a little while ago, but weirdly enough, professional wrestling is a really good way to understand modern politics and modern culture. So professional wrestling years ago, people used to think that it was real, that people got in fights and, you know, somebody won, somebody lost. Eventually, people got smart to the fact that professional wrestling wasn't real. And when that happened, and when this specifically hit its heyday in the 1990s with the rise of the internet, all of a sudden people became less interested in what happened between the two wrestlers and what happened behind the scenes to figure out who decided who would win the match. That's a game within a game. So as the people understood that wrestling was fake, they became more and more fascinated with who in the back decided who would win the match. They became interested in the palace intrigue of who decided how the game was rigged. Politics is not real. The game that we see on TV is a big giant spectacle, and we know that it's fake, and we know that power doesn't really originate from the people anymore. We know that our government is bought and sold, and it serves at the interest of the wealthy and the powerful. We understand that it's completely rigged. So what do? We spend a lot of time watching this stuff and thinking about what happens behind the scenes. We like to think about, oh, this person's in the know, this person made this move. So what has happened with Chuck Todd and people like Chuck Todd is that they are covering politics not from the idea that politics can never do anything or change anything. They're covering it as a game. It's the same way as you turn on ESPN and it's like this quarterback threw for 300 yards and 4 touchdowns. Chuck Todd gets on TV. He's like, he doesn't say Trump lied. He says what Trump is saying and whether or not it will work. The problem is that when the system gets short-circuited and all of a sudden Donald Trump is the president of the United States, it starts hurting America. But he can't stop playing the game. What we all are part of is a large spreading sphere of punditry. We suddenly think that we know what's going on in the game, and that's more important than politics being something that makes our lives better. So we start treating this the same way we would as a Monday morning quarterback. We're like, well, I think that appeal will work, and that appeal will work, and that appeal won't work, and that will work, and that won't work. Meanwhile, people are fucking dying. They're getting forced hysterectomies at the border. Other people are being harassed and marginalized, and their lives are actually being lost as white supremacists are carrying out terrorist attacks and hurting people. The problem is that the people on TV who are talking about this, they're not dealing with that stuff. They have incredible amounts of money. Most of them come from privileged backgrounds, and they're not in danger. So it's a game to them. It's a sport. It's a problem. That's what he's doing. So when you turn on a lot, and by the way, that doesn't mean that there aren't people on TV who are doing incredible jobs. There are. There are actually people on TV who actually take the journalism seriously. The problem is that a lot of them don't. Is that they're playing a game. They're figuring out this chess move and that chess move and that chess move. It's a problem. August. Oh, this is nice. How long have you and Nick been friends, and how did you meet? So Nick Hauselman is my co-host on the Muckrake podcast. Nick interviewed me in 2016 when I was covering the Trump campaign. We had a very nice rapport as we talked. I remember I did the interview. I pulled over on the side of the road and I did his interview. Nick Hauselman is like one of the premier internet analysts of the NBA. He's called Coach Nick. He's really, really well known. Like he's kind of a big deal. But so he wanted to talk about politics. He had me on. We had a good rapport. A couple of years later, I ran into him back in the day when we could go out in public. I ran into him in Los Angeles. We had lunch, by the way, as somebody like fires off a few rounds of a gun. We had lunch, we had a drink, and we talked about possibly doing a podcast. And we decided to do a podcast, and that's how the Muckrake podcast came about. He's fun. I like Nick quite a bit. Saul. Okay. Here we go. Saul, give me a huge hot take about where the human race is heading. So I read this. Oh yeah, I live deep now in Blue State, Georgia, but I live deep in Georgia. Okay. Huge hot take about the future of the human race. So when I read that, I made a couple of rules for myself about how I was going to answer this. I want to go beyond Trump. That's what I decided. I wanted to go beyond Trump, and I wanted to go like right now I'm studying the Middle Ages for a project. So I wanted to go in the past and look back, right, and sort of understand what had happened. So I'm going to give you the pessimistic take, and then I'm going to give you the optimistic take. So the pessimistic take is this. We do not figure out the problem of fascism in America or around the world, because it's a growing problem of neo-fascism around the world. We get to the climate catastrophe. We have depleting resources, which, by the way, is a big, giant problem. Because one of the things that you have to understand is that capitalism relies on expansion. Okay, so one of the things that has to happen in a capitalist society is you always have to grow your markets. This is one of the reasons why places like Sears or J.C. Penney are in trouble. You always have to grow and grow and grow. This is why you'll read articles that are like McDonald's in a little bit of trouble. And it's like there's a McDonald's on every street corner, right? So what ends up happening is capitalism requires constant, unfettered growth, and eventually it reaches a point where it can't grow anymore. We're at that point right now. This is a point of crisis. This is one of the reasons why we're seeing fascism rear its ugly head, is because fascism appears whenever capitalism is in trouble. Because what you have to do is you have to figure out a way to exploit people. Because if you can't expand anymore, what you have to do is you have to reduce rights and privileges and wealth and labor. So you have to be able to start to, I don't know, figure out ways to get rid of minimum wage. You have to start throwing some kids in sweatshops. You have to start finding some slave labor. Just letting you know that's kind of where things are happening in America. So if we don't figure out fascism before the climate catastrophe starts to contract America and resources around the world, that fascism is just going to take off like wildfire. The conversations we're having right now about people of color and immigrants and all of that stuff, if we don't get it taken care of right now and we don't deal with it right now, it's just going to blow up. It's just going to blow up, and it's going to look good to a lot of people when we have to start making decisions about what to do about millions of climate refugees and what to do with our resources. That's a frightening thing. That's a really frightening prospect. The other frightening part of it is the technological aspect of it. If you look at what happened or what's happening in China right now, you actually have a situation where tech, in conjunction with fascists, and by the way, we have seen that capitalists always align with fascists in times of crisis. All of a sudden, they can create an alternate reality from which we'll never be able to escape. They'll monitor us. They'll use it to, make our decisions for us. And on top of that, they'll be able to crush any type of dissent. And they'll be able to give us a fake version of reality that keeps us from protesting and doing anything. That's a frightening future, because right now we are on the precipice of a major crisis. And a major crisis almost always leads to some sort of a major world schism. And if we don't figure things out and we don't figure out what the right side of that schism is, we're in trouble. Here's the optimistic take about the future of mankind. Oh, real fast. There's an alternate it's not negative, it's not bad. There's a possibility that virtual reality is what creates the future space. Like there's no more land, but we can all go in virtual reality, and so people are able to do whatever. That to me is a pretty disturbing thing. But I've talked to a lot of people who think that that is a real possibility, that all of a sudden we can have an infinite space within virtual reality that a lot of people can exist within and we can deal with. I hate it too. I'm not into that. What I hope is this. I keep looking at history. And what I see in history is that humanity always fights back. Right now, I'm in the Middle Ages. They weren't allowed to read for generations upon generations upon generations. They weren't allowed to read. And the church ran roughshod over them. Guess what? They learned how to read. They started fighting back. They started creating culture. They started declaring independence from it. There were revolutions that led to us. I have faith in humanity. Humanity finds a way. Humanity screws up all the time, and we do some really awful things. But we are an inspiring species sometimes. I have hope. I actually have a lot of hope. And I have to tell you that nuclear bombs is a frightening thing, because as America loses its influence in the world, nuclear bombs are going to start looking pretty good. That's a different conversation for a different day. I have hope, though. I really, really do. I keep looking at it and it seems like there is hope. I have hope. And I have to tell you, first and foremost, we rejected Donald Trump at the ballot box. That was pretty amazing. That's a start, but we have a lot of work to do. And I think we're going to rediscover that we have power, and then we're going to be okay. I think we're going to figure out that we have power and organize and repair the atomization of society. And I think we'll have a better future, but we have to do it. Amy says, in the most recent episode of United States of Anxiety, guest historian Dr. David Blight called the Republican Party a modern version of the Confederacy without the revolutionary action and the election loss, a new lost cause narrative. Thoughts? I think that's exactly right. I think the Republican Party is going to push for years and years and years, if not decades, this idea that this election was stolen. I think they'll slough off Trump. I think they'll keep the cult. And as a matter of fact, I think they'll dive, head first into QAnon type Trumpism bullshit. I think they're going to push this idea that the election was stolen for a very long time, for sure. Sharp Tooth, what are your thoughts on Guatemala? Can you give a quick run through of the U.S. interventions and what led to now? Absolutely. So in the Civil War, Jesus, in the Cold War, we wanted to maintain power however possible and further our hegemonic project. So we undermined democratically elected leaders anytime that we thought they might be socialist. So we interfered in countries around the world, and we did it with impunity. We pretended like we were, this all good, heroic country while we undermined people. A lot of this stuff is coming back to haunt us now. We should have done better. We should have done better. We should have fought for democracy around the world, whether or not the people who won those democratic elections were people that we wanted to win. I mean, it's pretty bad. It sucks. Tim, what can sane people in deep red areas do now? Form organizations. There's still probably more of you than there are of them. You got to get people out to vote. And on top of that, you got to start forming networks where you know each other and you take care of each other and you have communities who look out for one another. That's a big, giant thing. What Georgia showed you, and by the way, Stacey Abrams and the African-American community in Georgia showed you, is you may live in a red state, but that red state is just like the reality of the moment. I mean, there are tons of places around here. If people understood what was going on and how they were being manipulated, they might switch. So what I would say is if you live in a red state, I would say volunteer. I would say be part of a canvassing unit. I would say work with these communities. Now, you says I live in Texas. Texas is going to go blue real soon. And the organization in Texas is crazy right now. Here's the whole point. And Julia says, I have hope for Missouri. I have hope for Missouri, too. I have hope for Indiana. I saw Indiana go for Barack Obama back in 2008. The whole point is, if you actually have an operation, you can win. We have to get rid of this mentality of blue states and red states because it doesn't mean that it's permanent. Because they're not. The Republican Party is really unpopular. Whew. Oh, no, Sarah, I think voter suppression is going to be crazy in Georgia. I think it's going to be crazy in Georgia and the South. It just means we have to work harder. Period. We got to work harder. How do we fight back against aggressive gerrymandering? We get people elected who won't do it. And by the way, this is something I talk about on here all the time. The Democratic Party punted multiple times on so many of these states. I actually appreciated Howard Dean, which, by the way, another real one. Howard Dean did so much. Crazy. Where you have a 50-state strategy. You don't give any states up. You got to have the operations in order to have future victories. That's one thing that we got to learn in this country. Elections don't end on election night. You got to do a lot of different things. James Berg, any advice for what folks live outside the U.S. can do to support? And James is in Canada. You need to be careful up in Canada. Because this whole thing, if we don't figure this thing out, I'm drinking Knob Creek Rye tonight, by the way. If we don't figure this whole thing out, this is going to be everywhere. Because neo-fascism is coming, particularly with the climate catastrophe looming and artificial austerity. So fascism is not just here. It's a big, giant worldwide movement because capitalism is failing. Capitalism has reached its terminal state, which means it will either suppress people by violence and find new people to exploit through either marginalized labor or slave labor, or it'll just kill you and make room for other people. That's what it's all about. Noah, what recommendations would you give to Biden and legislatures on how to fight propaganda and disinfo crisis? So here's the thing. I think Democrats need to do a lot better in just calling out this bullshit. The bigger problem here is that for decades now, and this goes back to Reaganism, this goes back to neoliberalism, the Democrats have just lived within the reality that the Republican Party decides. And they're so afraid of challenging it, lest they be called socialists, liberals, revolutionaries, whatever. They're so afraid to challenge it that they never point out the fact that the Republican Party is simply lying. They've been lying and peddling bullshit for decades now. They need a backbone. They need to stop being afraid of this stuff. So what I would advise is just to tell the truth. The great thing about the truth is it's the truth. You have the strength of the truth. And once people start to realize it, and this is something that Trump figured out. Trump came in and said, both these parties are full of shit. And people are like, I like that because I know that both parties are full of shit. So all of a sudden, if you come in and you're like, by the way, this whole line of bullshit people have been peddling, it's bullshit. People are like, yeah, it kind of is. Democratic Party needs to get on board of that. Tom, years ago on a podcast, I heard you on a podcast today talking about something you call post-millennial Christian pessimism. What does that mean? I did this for Boys Bible Study, which I watched this Christian sci-fi movie, and then I did a podcast about it. It's worth listening to. What I realized is that there is a changing, sort of shifting idea within the Christian identity. It used to be that the apocalypse would come, they would fight the Antichrist, and they would defeat the Antichrist, and the world would become a new Jerusalem, and it would be owed to them. But with climate catastrophe and with changing political realities, I think what is becoming clear is that Christians are thinking that they have to leave society. They either have to leave the United States or, liberal democracy or the earth, which is a shift. It seems small, but it's a pretty giant shift in terms of what they think about the world. Ben says, why does it seem like baby boomers are having such a difficult time dealing with the political climate right now? Well, all you need to know is you had a couple of boomers run for the presidency. I mean, the baby boom generation is having a really hard time letting go of power. It so happens that the baby boom generation sort of sees themselves as the saviors of mankind, and they never want to let go. And so they have held on to wealth and jobs and careers, as well as political power. They're having a really hard go with it. And the other thing that is part of this is that their version of reality is the version of reality that's splintering, right? We talked about this the other day on the Muckrake podcast with Forrest Gump and that sort of like version of American history that we all know is fake now. We know that America hasn't worked the way that conventional history and entertainments and popular culture have taught us. It's not true. So they're having a really hard time letting go of this version of reality in which they are the protagonist. And so they keep the jobs, they keep the money, they keep the wealth, they keep the influence, they keep the political power. That's what's happening right now. That's one of the major problems in America, actually, is that there's not enough room for everybody else. It's rough. It's rough stuff. BG Morose, what do you make of Ed Norton's analysis of Trump's behavior? Gambling. It's always gambling. If you haven't had a chance, and by the way, a recommendation, Adam Curtis's Hypernormalization. I was just recommending that on Twitter before I got on here. There's a story in there about Trump Casino, how like there was this major gambler that came over. I want to say it was from Japan. And it was talking about Trump as a gambler. Trump is a gambler, and he always has been. And one of the things that he's doing is he's just trying shit. And that's who he is. He's always been gambling with house money. He never made any money. It was all given to him. He's a child of privilege, and it was all handed to him. So he's just playing with house money, seeing what happens. He's a gambler. Tune back. As long as both parties are neoliberals, it's hard to see how we overcome the problems we are facing. Time is short. How do we confront 40 years of hypercapitalism? We make them. We elect people who don't believe in hypercapitalism and who see it as a major problem and who see it as a means of exploitation and as a means of quickening the climate catastrophe. We have to elect people who represent us and believe in a future that looks better than this one. Neoliberals believe the market will just solve everything. Well, guess what? The market doesn't solve everything. It's what got us here. You can't sit here and pretend like technocrats are going to save us, because they're not. It's not a little bit here, a little bit there, turn this knob, turn that knob. We need to change things in a big, giant way. The market is rigged. Absolutely it is. So no, we have to get beyond that idea. Chris C. How do we talk people out of the idea that a centrist divided government or the mythical Lincoln-esque team of rivals is the best means? I don't know. If people can figure that out, I would love to hear a solution, because people in America love voting for divided governments, just screwing themselves over. They just love being on cruise control and figuring things out and getting down the road. And by the way, this is a problem in Georgia. These special elections, we need to elect both of these Democratic Senate candidates in order to have a government that even functions. And even then, we have to get beyond the Supreme Court, but that's a conversation for a different day. So no, divided government is some bullshit. Doesn't work. Question for tonight's Bourbon Talk. Are Rittenhouse and Cawthorn the future of the Republicans? Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this Rittenhouse thing is just disgusting and awful. Oh my God. No, I agree, Lois. I don't think it's a stereotype for baby boomers. I think we're watching a larger generational thing. I'm glad you said that. I think that's true. I think that's exactly true. I think there are people who stayed true to the cause, and there were others who got bought off by transcendent wealth. I think there is a difference. I'm glad you said that. Wait, did I answer that last one? But yeah, I think they're the future of the Republican Party. Rittenhouse is a hero to these people. And I mean, Cawthorn is just a straight white supremacist. It's really bad. The Republican Party's not going to turn away from QAnon. It's not going to turn away from white supremacy. It's just not. I know that sucks, but that's who they are. It's performative patriotism while bilking everyone until they take everything and they leave us dead. That's the entirety of the Republican Party moving forward. Elia, what in your opinion is the best way for us individuals to start the healing of systematic racism in America? It's got to get done. Absolutely, it does. I have to tell you, I am really hopeful after the BLM protest movement started, and there were people who, you saw these polls, and it was like 70% of Americans believed that there was systemic racism in this country. That was a huge thing. That's a massive movement. It shows me that there's malleability here. But what I keep saying, and by the way, just cheap plug, my book, American Rule, we have to start looking at American history and what's real and what's fake, what the mythology is. That old white supremacist idea, it holds back white people as well as people of color. I mean, white people are still enjoying systemic privilege, but it's also holding back like poorer white people as well. There's a big giant problem there. If you start to realize that those things hurt everybody, it'll help. And by the way, like I have to tell you, like, it's held back progress. Political progress, economic progress, scientific progress, tons of progress. If white supremacy didn't get in the way, we'd have universal health care. We'd have better infrastructure. I mean, we wouldn't have this artificial austerity. All of that is based on it. It sucks. Just sucks. Shark, what are things people, specifically people who aren't journalists or politicians, can do to help defeat this cult? I keep saying that one thing that you have to do is you have to be able to start repairing the atomization of society. I keep saying, like, one of the things, and by the way, the people I know who have been radicalized by both Trumpism but also QAnon and all these conspiracy theories and stuff, they're going through personal crises. There's a mental health crisis in this country, and a lot of these people are very lonely, and they're looking for other contact, or they're looking for a feeling of power. That's how they radicalize it. I keep saying, I talk to white supremacist terrorists, or former white supremacist terrorists, I should say, and they tell you these are the people that they find: people who have mental health problems, people who are isolated, people who feel powerless. Reach out to the people you know. Just talk to them as humans. Don't talk about politics. Later on, maybe you can talk about politics once you reestablish trust. And education is a massive thing. A massive thing. It's been systematically destroyed in this country. We've gotten rid of critical thinking. We've gotten rid of history and civics and all these things that should be there as safeguards against this dangerous misinformation. And it's just gone now. We got to work. We got a lot of work to do. A lot of work to do. I have 2 questions left, but we're very, very close to 1 hour. We're 30 seconds off, and then we're going to toast, and then we're going to finish these 2 questions, and then we're going to go about our Sunday evenings. Before we get there, I just want to say thank you. Very nice of you to hang out with me on a Sunday night. I'm always very thankful for that. I think we should have free higher education. That's me. That's me. All right, here we are. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Cheers to an hour. All right, 2 questions left, and then we're gonna bail out on this thing. Lisa, I was reading American Rule and was really disturbed by how the internet started and what it's become. Can it be saved? I don't know. That's a big question. I have to assume, like most emerging technologies, that there's a possibility it can be reformed and focused and made better. But the internet has trapped us in just an absolute simulated world. I mean, I have a platform over on Twitter, but I'm not in denial about it. Like, Twitter is more or less a machine that takes your outrage and profits off of it and turns all of us into individual corporations competing against each other economically. And it sort of makes everything fake or synthesized. It's really screwed up. The internet was seen as a utopian project. I love the idea that it could possibly help with democracy, or it could possibly help with the organizing, but it's been a really dangerous anti-democratic tool. We have to start looking at the internet and saying, if you're not paying for something, you are the product. So maybe we have to pay for things. I know that's not popular, but maybe we need to pay for things. Maybe we need to change the economic model. I don't know. Because the economic model right now with the internet is, I'll look at all your free sites, but I have to give you a free insight into my brain. The problem with the internet is it's advertising like 3.0. Like, you create all these profiles and all these things, and you're basically telling the advertisers what you want, and you're giving them insight that you wouldn't give them otherwise. And we're being completely psychologically manipulated by it constantly. It's a dangerous thing. It needs a massive amount of reform. And on top of that, it's a utility, and it should be regulated like a utility. All right, last question. American Times, we all know why we despair. What gives you hope for the way out of this dangerous era for truth and democracy? I'm going to say this, and somebody's going to roll their eyes. It's true. It's you. We're hanging out right now, and there's over 400 people who just listen to me yammer on my porch drinking bourbon. That's awesome. There are a bunch of people right now, because of this moment of crisis, that they are incredibly tuned in to what's going on. They're incredibly tuned in to what's going on politically. People are learning things. They're learning about history. They're learning about, political processes. There are people who are getting organized. I keep saying this all the time. We're building a community here. Like, you listen and hang out with me for a while. Some people are patrons over at the Muck Rig podcast. That's awesome. But we're there for each other. I've been watching people who just started out listening to the Muck Rig podcast who somebody goes through a crisis and the other person asks them, if they're okay. They take care of them on a night like tonight, just on a Sunday night, having some bourbon, hanging out. We're there for each other. That's awesome. That's so cool. I cannot tell you a more human thing than that. This thing, I'm sitting here looking at my laptop. I'm sitting on my porch right now, looking at my laptop. I could do anything with this. I could go anywhere. I could be engaged in just self-destructive behaviors. I could just waste all of my time. Instead, I'm hanging out here with really nice people who are nice to one another while getting informed and taking care of each other and forming connections. That's big. I will not show Dixie because I have to tell you, Dixie and Betsy are nuts. Nuts. I would love nothing more than to bring Betsy out here, but she would just chew on everything. It would be awful. But no, I'm serious. There is so much humanity in this. And in this moment of crisis is bringing out the best in each other. It's not, the internet is not great. And there is so much, there's so much division on the internet. There's so much bullshit on the internet. But this sort of community and the repairing of atomization has given me so much incredible hope. And as I'm doing the research, and like I said, I'm doing this project right now where I'm relearning the history of Western civilization. It's incredible what humans can do even under incredible oppression. In the Middle Ages, people weren't able to read. The church had complete power over everything. Kings, monarchs, all of them were just in charge of everything. And if you even like spoke against them, a knight would come over and skewer you and you would be done. And somehow or another, we learned how to read, we learned how to organize, we came together. Then you had like these moments of greatness with humanity, and then later on we threw off the yoke of oppression. We didn't do it into completion, which is one of the problems, by the way, is when we look at the era of revolutions, we're like, we got rid of all the kings and queens and we have freedom and liberty. No, it turned into an aristocracy. That's what happened. The project is continuing. We have a long way to go, and we may not see it. I hate to tell you that. We might be at a juncture in world history that we might not see the fruits of our labor, but we have to work on it. We have to leave a better world. Have to. What else are we doing? Leave a better world for other people. You have to have optimism. I'm not nihilistic. I was more nihilistic before. Oh, right now, Kelly, I'm actually researching the bubonic plague and how it changed Europe. That's actually what I'm doing at this moment. But I was nihilistic before I started doing this. I was nihilistic before I started covering politics. It just seemed like everything was beyond my control. But the more that I've covered politics, the more I've gotten to know people, the more I've been able to like press my shoulder against the wheel, the more I've realized that there's an opportunity to change things. I'm incredibly hopeful. You should be hopeful too. This moment sucks. This moment sucks. There's a coup going on. It's a stupid coup. It's an embarrassing coup. It's a laughable coup, but there's a coup going on right now. The Republican Party is an anti-democratic fascistic movement. It needs to go away. But I have hope. I have a lot of real hope. I do. And that's what I'm going to cheers to before we get out of here. This week, we got Thanksgiving coming up. I have a lot to be thankful for, even during one of the shittiest years of my life, and I assume one of your lives. I have a lot to be thankful for. I hope you do as well. I hope you have a great Thanksgiving. I'm going to be back here next Sunday night. The Muckrake podcast is going to have a new episode on Tuesday. I don't think we're going to have one on Friday this week because of the holiday, but we'll have one on Tuesday. We have hopefully a really good, great guest. I'm hoping this works out. Meantime, thanks everybody for hanging out on a Sunday night. I hope you subscribe, all that business. I've been doing a lot more live streams lately because, we're in the middle of a crisis. I appreciate all of you. I really, really do. Have a great week. Happy Thanksgiving. Stay safe.